If you open any standard textbook on economics or political science from the last 50 years, there is a fundamental rule that is treated like a law of physics. It says you have two choices. You can have a free market capitalist system like the United States, where private property and competition drive wealth. Or you can have a state-controlled communist system like the old Soviet Union, where the government owns everything, but the economy eventually stagnates. For decades, we were told these two systems are like oil and water. They cannot mix. If you try to combine them, the system should collapse. But right now, the second largest economy on Earth is proving that rule completely wrong. China has built something that logically shouldn't exist. It is a country where a communist party maintains absolute, iron-fisted political control. Yet, it is home to some of the world's wildest stock markets and wealthiest tech billionaires. It is a place where the government can make people disappear for speaking out, yet it produces more iPhones, Teslas, and Nikes than anywhere else. And before the West could figure out how that was even possible, China transformed itself from a poverty-stricken agrarian society into an economic superpower that is rewriting the rules of global history. So, how exactly did they pull this off? How do you run a country that is totalitarian and hyper-capitalist at the same time? And the trillion-dollar question, is this hybrid machine sustainable, or is it a bubble waiting to burst? To understand this, we have to go back to when this experiment began. Because for the first 30 years of its existence, the People's Republic of China followed the rulebook. When Mao Zedong took power in 1949, China went all in on pure, orthodox communism. The state owned the land. The state owned the factories. Private business was illegal. Competition was banned. And, quite frankly, it was an economic disaster. By the late 1970s, after decades of political purges and the catastrophic Great Famine, China was dirt poor. We are talking about hundreds of millions of people surviving on less than $1 a day. The economy was stuck in reverse, and the country was on the brink of collapse. Then came 1978. This is the year everything changed. A man named Deng Xiaoping took the helm. Deng was a lifelong Communist Party leader, but unlike his predecessors, he was a pragmatist. He looked at the chaos around him and realized that ideology doesn't put food on the table. He famously said, "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice." So, Deng made a deal that would change the world. He decided to open the economic door to capitalism. But, and this is the crucial part, he kept the political door locked tight. The Communist Party would retain absolute control over the military, the government, the courts, and the media. There would be no elections, no opposition parties, no free press. But inside that cage, he unleashed the market. He launched a policy called reform and opening up. Suddenly, farmers could sell their surplus crops for a profit. Foreign companies were invited to set up factories in special zones like Shenzhen. Private businesses were given legal protection. Fast forward to today, and the results of this experiment are staggering. Since 1978, China's economy has grown by an average of about 9% every single year. In 1980, their GDP was less than $300 billion. Today, it is approaching $20 trillion. They have lifted over 800 million people out of poverty, the single largest reduction of human suffering in economic history. A fishing village like Shenzhen transformed into a futuristic tech megalopolis of 12 million people in just one generation. So, what does this socialism with Chinese characteristics actually look like in practice? How does the machinery work? Think of it as a two-track system. On one track, you have the state. The Communist Party controls the commanding heights of the economy. They own the land. They control the energy grid, the telecommunications networks, the major banks, and the defense industry. These are run by massive state-owned enterprises, or SOEs. These giants aren't necessarily trying to maximize profit. They are there to execute the government's will. If Beijing wants a high-speed rail network connecting every city, the SOEs build it, even if it loses money. If the party wants to dominate the global solar panel market, the state banks flood the sector with cheap loans to drive out foreign competition. On the second track, you have the private sector. This is where the chaos and the magic happen. As long as you don't threaten the party's political power, you can start a business, innovate, and get obscenely rich. Companies like Alibaba, Tencent, and TikTok's parent company ByteDance exploded out of this sector. Today, incredibly, China has more billionaires than any country on Earth except for the United States. Western economists call this state capitalism. It gives China a unique advantage that democratic countries struggle to compete with. Long-term strategic planning. In the US or Europe, politicians are trapped in short election cycles. They can rarely plan more than 4 years ahead. But in China, the party isn't going anywhere. They can set 5-year plans, 10-year plans, even 50-year plans, and stick to them. They can mobilize resources on a scale that makes the Apollo program look small. They treat the entire country like a laboratory, testing new economic laws in one city, and if they work, rolling them out nationwide. For 40 years, Western analysts have been predicting that this system would collapse. They argued that you cannot have economic freedom without political freedom. They said that eventually, as people got richer, they would demand the right to vote. They said that corruption and inefficiency would rot the system from the inside. And yet, the collapse hasn't happened. The Communist Party forged a new social contract with the people. We will make you rich, and in exchange, you will let us rule. For the most part, the Chinese people took the deal. Why risk the chaos of revolution when your life is getting better every single year? However, we are now reaching a turning point. The cracks in this hybrid model are starting to show, and they are deep. First, there is the debt. To keep those GDP numbers growing, China has borrowed an astronomical amount of money. Local governments, state-owned companies, and real estate developers have binged on cheap credit. The collapse of giants like Evergrande exposed a real estate bubble worth hundreds of billions of dollars. China's total debt is now roughly 280% of its GDP higher than the United States. A lot of that money went into building things nobody needs: empty apartment blocks, unused airports, and factories producing goods nobody is buying. Second, there is the middle income trap. It is easy to grow fast when you are starting from zero. You just build factories and use cheap labor. But eventually, wages go up. You can't be the world's sweatshop forever. Factories are already moving to cheaper places like Vietnam. To keep growing, China needs to innovate. They need to invent the next big technology. But this brings us to the fundamental contradiction of the system. Can you have world-class innovation without freedom? Under the current leader, Xi Jinping, the pendulum has swung back toward control. Xi has consolidated more power than any leader since Mao. He has unleashed a massive anti-corruption purge, but he has also cracked down on the private sector. Remember Jack Ma? The founder of Alibaba was the poster child of Chinese success. But when he criticized the banking regulators in 2020, he essentially disappeared for months, and the government crushed his company's massive IPO. The message to every entrepreneur in China was clear: you can be rich, but never forget who is actually in charge. This creates a culture of fear. How do you build the next Google or the next Apple if you are terrified that the government will shut you down if you get too big? Innovation requires the freedom to think, to experiment, and to challenge authority. The Communist Party is betting that they can force innovation through state mandates. But history suggests that top-down invention rarely works, as well as bottom-up creativity. On top of that, China is facing a demographic time bomb. The one-child policy, which was enforced from 1980 to 2015, has left the country with a shrinking workforce. By 2050, China could have more people over the age of 60 than under the age of 20. They are getting old before they fully get rich. That means fewer workers to drive the economy and more retirees draining the pension system. And finally, the geopolitical environment has turned hostile. The West, particularly the United States, has woken up. They no longer see China as a trading partner, but as a strategic rival. We are seeing trade wars, technology bans on chips, and rising military tensions over Taiwan and the South China Sea. For 40 years, China grew by exporting to the West. If those markets close, the hybrid model faces its biggest test yet. So, where does this leave us? Others believe the system is a house of cards. They argue that the debt, the demographics, and the stifling of political freedom will eventually cause the engine to seize up, leading to stagnation or even a Soviet-style collapse. The truth is, nobody knows. Experts have been wrong about China, for every single decade since 1978. But one thing is undeniable: China has broken the mold. It has proven that there is more than one path to modernity. It has challenged the idea that democracy and capitalism are inseparable. Whether this hybrid beast survives the next 40 years or crashes under its own weight is the most important story of our lifetimes. The West tried to change China, but in the end, China's rise might end up changing the West.